Thanks for tuning in to Crazy Mango Stories. Give a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell for more betrayal stories. The evening air hung heavy as Diego stepped into his quiet home, a day earlier than expected. A deep silence filled each room, amplifying the creak of the wooden floors beneath his footsteps. The place felt off, as though someone had shuffled everything slightly while he was away. The first oddity he noticed was the faint whiff of a scent one he knew was not his own. A sharp, masculine cologne lingered faintly in the hallway, weaving its way into the house like an intruder. He took a deep breath, his jaw tightening, but he said nothing, still searching, still trying to make sense of what his instincts were telling him. As he moved toward the living room, another unsettling detail caught his eye, a shirt draped over the back of a chair, foreign in style and size. It was not his, and he knew all too well that it wasn't Maria's. Yet there it lay, abandoned casually, almost mockingly, on his favorite chair. His pulse quickened as he continued down the hall toward the bedroom. There, from under the closed door, a faint strip of warm light slipped out, pooling onto the dark floorboards. Diego stared at it, his heart a storm of emotions. He reached for the doorknob, pausing just long enough to rein in his rising anger. The truth, whatever it was, could wait a few minutes longer. He wanted to be sure. Diego stood still for a moment outside the closed bedroom door, feeling the chill of dread settle in his bones. He closed his eyes, taking a deep breath as he tried to summon the strength to open it. The light filtering out from under the door felt like a glaring sign of betrayal, cutting through the shadows and confirming his worst fears. Yet, he knew he couldn't turn back now. He needed to know what was happening in his own home, the place he had built with Maria, the woman he thought he knew. Slowly, he turned the handle and stepped inside. The room was empty, but the faint smell of that same cologne hit him stronger here, lingering in the air as if someone had just left. He glanced around, his eyes narrowing as he took in the slight disarray. The bed wasn't neatly made as usual, the sheets rumpled and the pillows askew, something Maria would never have allowed. Diego's gaze drifted to the nightstand on his side of the bed. A glass of wine sat there, half-finished, and next to it was a book he didn't recognize. It was a thriller novel with a bold cover, something Maria never read. She preferred romantic novels, the kinds with happy endings. A prickle of anger simmered beneath his calm exterior, his mind reeling with questions he wasn't ready to ask out loud. He walked around the room, running his fingers along the dresser and stopping at Maria's vanity. Her jewelry box was open, a few pieces missing, and he noticed a small, crumpled note sticking out from one of the drawers. He hesitated, then pulled it out, smoothing the paper under his fingers. The handwriting wasn't Maria's. It was slanted, bold, a style that seemed as foreign as the shirt in the living room. The words were brief, just a line or two, but they struck him like a blow. Can't wait to see you again. Until next time, love. The room spun slightly as Diego read the note again, the words embedding themselves into his mind. He fought back the urge to crumple the paper and throw it across the room, clenching his fists to steady himself. Betrayal, hot and raw, pulsed through him, but he swallowed it down. He had promised himself he wouldn't react just yet, not until he knew everything. As he turned to leave the bedroom, he noticed another odd detail, a pair of men's shoes half hidden under the bed, polished and pristine, looking as out of place as everything else he'd noticed. Diego's hand shook as he picked them up, staring at the perfectly shined leather. There was no denying it now. Someone had been in his home, in his bedroom, and it wasn't just any acquaintance or friend. This man had crossed the line, had taken something Diego held sacred. He took one last look around the room before stepping back into the hallway. The house felt emptier than ever, like a hollow shell of the place he once cherished. Diego knew he couldn't confront Maria immediately. If she had done this, if she had betrayed him this deeply, then he would need to be prepared for what would come next. Determined, he set the shoes back in place, straightened his shirt, and went to the living room to wait. If Maria was hiding something from him, he would get her to reveal it, no matter what it took. This time, he would hear the truth directly from her, even if it shattered him in the process. As Diego waited in the living room, he forced himself to sit calmly, though every fiber of his being wanted to storm through the house, searching for more clues. The unfamiliar shirt still hung on the back of the chair, a silent accusation in plain sight. Diego's mind raced with questions, each one feeding a deepening sense of betrayal that felt almost physical, like a weight pressing on his chest. He glanced at his watch, feeling the minutes drag by as he waited for Maria's return. It was nearly midnight when he finally heard the soft click of keys and the creak of the front door. Diego steeled himself, watching Maria step inside, her expression tired but her demeanor oddly casual. She was dressed elegantly, in a way that made his heart twist, a reminder of the woman he had loved and trusted for so many years. As she spotted him sitting there, her surprise was evident, but it was quickly replaced by a forced smile. "Oh, Diego, you're back early," she said, a hint of nervousness slipping into her voice as she set down her purse. Her gaze flicked toward the shirt on the chair for the briefest moment, but she quickly looked back at him, as if pretending not to notice it. "Yes, I finished up early and thought I'd surprise you," Diego replied evenly, masking his emotions with a calmness he didn't feel. He studied her carefully, noting the way she avoided his gaze, her fingers twitching slightly as she removed her coat. It was subtle, but it was there a sign that she was hiding something. Maria moved toward the kitchen, feigning casualness as she poured herself a glass of water. "Did you have a good trip?" she asked, her back turned to him. Diego couldn't help but feel that her question was a distraction, a way to avoid the real conversation looming between them. "It was fine," he replied, his voice steady, "though I noticed a few changes around here." She froze for a moment, her hand tightening around the glass, but she quickly recovered, turning to face him with a carefully crafted smile. "Oh, what do you mean?" Diego's eyes didn't leave hers. "There's a shirt in the living room that I don't recognize, and there's a strong cologne lingering in the house, one that isn't mine." He paused, watching her reaction. "And then, there's this." He held up the crumpled note, his voice turning colder. "Care to explain?" For a split second, he saw her mask slip, a flash of panic crossing her face. But just as quickly, Maria's expression hardened, her smile vanishing. She straightened her shoulders, a defiant glint in her eyes. "If you already found all that, Diego, then I suppose there's no point in hiding it." Her admission, so calm and cold, felt like a knife twisting in his gut. Diego's heart hammered as he struggled to keep his composure. "How long?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Long enough," Maria replied, her tone sharp. She crossed her arms, looking at him with a mixture of disdain and indifference that left him reeling. "Look, Diego, I don't owe you an explanation. You're always gone off on your business trips. What did you expect? I needed companionship, someone who could be there for me when you weren't." The words cut deep, each one stripping away any last illusions he'd held about their life together. He wanted to yell, to lash out, but he forced himself to stay calm. "So it was my fault then?" he asked, his voice trembling with barely controlled anger. She shrugged, sipping her water as if they were discussing something mundane. "If you want to see it that way." In that moment, Diego realized he wasn't just dealing with betrayal, he was dealing with a woman who felt no remorse, no shame. The pain morphed into something else, a cold resolve hardening inside him. He would not let her walk all over him. If she wanted a fight, he would give her one, and he would make sure she regretted ever underestimating him. Diego sat there, staring at the woman he thought he knew, grappling with the weight of her cold confession. Maria's expression remained stony, her eyes devoid of the warmth he once loved. It was as though a stranger stood before him, a woman who looked like Maria but had shed every ounce of care and respect for him. He took a deep breath, steadying his voice as he asked, "And this man, is he worth throwing away everything we built together?" Maria scoffed, barely able to mask her disdain. "Honestly, Diego, he gives me something you never could. Excitement. Passion." She paused, her words laced with cruelty. "He satisfies me in a way you never did." Her tone was sharp, deliberately piercing, and it struck at Diego's very core. The room fell silent as her words lingered, leaving a suffocating weight in the air. Diego felt a surge of anger rising, his fists clenching at his sides, but he forced himself to remain calm, to keep his emotions tightly controlled. He wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing him break. Finally, he stood, looking down at her with a newfound determination. "You may think this is the end of it, Maria," he said quietly, his voice simmering with a quiet rage. "But I assure you, it's not. If you've chosen this path, then you're going to learn what it truly means to betray me." Without waiting for her reaction, he turned and walked toward the door, feeling a strange sense of clarity as he left her standing alone in the room. Diego knew he had a plan to make, and when the time was right, she would feel every ounce of the pain she'd inflicted on him. Diego's mind raced as he left the house, his footsteps echoing in the quiet night. The air was cold, biting against his skin, but he barely noticed. His thoughts were consumed by Maria's words, each one replaying in his mind, deepening the wound she had carved into his heart. He couldn't shake the image of her face so indifferent, so cruel as she admitted to everything without a hint of remorse. He walked aimlessly through the empty streets, struggling to process the betrayal. It wasn't just the affair, it was her cold indifference. The ease with which he had turned on him, dismissing years of marriage as though they were nothing. Diego clenched his fists, his anger bubbling beneath the surface, but he forced himself to stay calm. Lashing out impulsively wouldn't serve him now, he needed to be smart about this. As he walked, an idea began to form in his mind, a way to take control of the situation rather than letting Maria's betrayal define him. He thought back to everything he had sacrificed for their marriage, the late nights, the endless business trips, all to give her the life she wanted. And this was her gratitude. To throw it all away for a fleeting thrill. No, he wouldn't allow her to walk away unscathed. Determined, he pulled out his phone and made a call to an old friend, Javier, who ran a private investigation firm. Diego hadn't spoken to him in a while, but he knew Javier was the best when it came to gathering information discreetly. The phone rang twice before a familiar, gravelly voice answered. "Diego, it's been a while. What's going on?" "I need your help," Javier Diego replied, keeping his voice steady. "I think Maria has been unfaithful. I need to know everything about the man she's been seeing. Where he lives, where he works, who he is. I want to know every detail." Javier hesitated for a moment before responding. "Consider it done. I'll look into it first thing in the morning." "Are you sure you want to go down this path?" Diego's jaw tightened. "I need the truth, Javier, and after that, I'll figure out the next steps." Ending the call, Diego felt a strange sense of empowerment. For the first time since he'd walked into that house tonight, he had a plan, something tangible to hold on to. He wouldn't just sit back and let Maria and her lover continue their charade. He would gather the facts, and then he would decide how to confront her, how to make her feel the weight of her actions. Returning home, he slipped quietly into the guest bedroom, not wanting to share a space with her, not tonight. The bed was cold and unfamiliar, but he didn't care. As he lay there, staring at the ceiling, he began to plot his next moves, considering every possible outcome. He would be patient, strategic, and ruthless if he had to be. By the time he was done, Maria would understand exactly what she had thrown away. She would learn that Diego was not a man to be crossed lightly, and he intended to make sure she regretted every choice that led them to this moment. The following morning, Diego woke early, his mind still fixed on the plan he'd begun to craft the night before. The sharp sting of betrayal lingered, but he had channeled it into something stronger, a determination to take control. He would not be a passive victim in this, not after everything he had done for Maria and their life together. Today, the wheels would start turning. As he sipped his coffee, he heard Maria moving about in the kitchen. She hadn't knocked on the guest room door, or even acknowledged his absence from their bed. The thought fueled his anger further, but he forced himself to stay composed. She would see his reaction soon enough, but on his terms. His phone buzzed and he saw a message from Javier. "I've got some information. Let's meet." Diego didn't waste time responding. He quickly finished his coffee, grabbed his keys, and slipped out of the house without a word to Maria. Half an hour later, Diego found himself in a dimly lit cafe sitting across from Javier. His friend had aged since the last time they'd met, his hair grayer and face more lined, but his sharp eyes were still just as intense. Javier slid a thin folder across the table. "It didn't take long to find him," he said quietly. "Your wife hasn't exactly been careful. The man's name is Lucas Navarro. He's single, works in sales, and recently moved to the city." Diego opened the folder, scanning through the details. There were photos to Lucas laughing with Maria outside a bar, the two of them embracing on a street corner. Each image felt like another knife twisting in his chest, but Diego steeled himself. He couldn't let emotions cloud his focus now. "He's been seen with her frequently," Javier continued. "They're not subtle, Diego. Either they're confident you'd never suspect, or they just don't care." Diego clenched his jaw. "So he thinks he can just walk into my life, take what's mine, and go on without consequences." Javier nodded slowly, a slight smirk crossing his face. "I thought you might feel that way. I took the liberty of finding out where he lives and works. There's more in that folder." Diego looked up, grateful for Javier's thoroughness. He had no desire to start a physical confrontation. That would be too easy for Lucas. Instead, he wanted to dismantle him piece by piece, much like Lucas had dismantled the life Diego thought he had. He wanted Lucas to feel his world crumble, just as his own had. "Thanks, Javier," Diego said, closing the folder and slipping it into his jacket. "I owe you one." Javier chuckled. "Just be careful, my friend. Revenge can be a slippery slope." Diego nodded, knowing the truth in his friend's words but feeling no urge to back down. As he left the cafe, he began forming the next steps of his plan. He would approach this like he handled his business deals, with patience, precision, and no mercy. Back home, he found Maria in the living room, looking up as he entered with a faint, almost smug smile. She had no idea what was coming, but that was just the way Diego wanted it. He would give her no warning, no hints. She would wake up one day and realize that everything she had taken for granted was gone. The thought gave him a grim satisfaction, and he met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "Maria," he said calmly, "we need to talk soon." "But not yet. When the time is right." She raised an eyebrow, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. But Diego merely turned away, walking upstairs with a newfound sense of control. His steps were deliberate, each one reinforcing his resolve. He was done being the victim. Soon Maria and Lucas would understand the depth of his pain, and they would come to regret the moment they had crossed him. The days that followed were a careful game of observation and restraint. Diego watched Maria closely, taking note of every phone call she took in hushed tones, every message she hastily deleted, every late night she claimed to be with friends. With each passing day, he collected pieces of evidence, laying the groundwork for a quiet but devastating confrontation. Javier continued to feed Diego information about Lucas, providing a steady stream of updates that only fueled Diego's resolve. He learned about Lucas's favorite hangouts, his workplace, and even his family ties back in a neighboring city. This wasn't just some careless fling for Lucas. It appeared he had settled into this affair with a confidence that infuriated Diego. But soon, that confidence would be shattered. Diego's anger was no longer the fiery, impulsive rage he had felt the night he discovered the truth. It had cooled, hardened into something much more calculated, like a sharpened blade waiting to strike. He had a plan now, and every detail mattered. One afternoon, Diego decided to take a small but critical step. He called Maria while she was at work, keeping his tone as light and calm as possible. "Hey, I was thinking," he said, feigning nonchalance, "why don't we have a special dinner this Friday? It's been a while since we had some time to ourselves." There was a brief pause on the other end. Then Maria responded, her voice carefully controlled. "Oh, that sounds nice, Diego, but Friday I may have some plans, with the girls." Diego's grip tightened on the phone, but he kept his tone even. "Can't you reschedule? It would mean a lot to me." Another pause, longer this time, before she reluctantly agreed. "All right, I'll be home Friday evening." Diego smiled, though she couldn't see it. "Great, I'll take care of everything. Just be ready by 7. After hanging up, he immediately called Javier. "It's set," he said. "I need you to be ready Friday night. I want everything recorded, her reactions, every word she says. I want her to see exactly what she's done." Javier agreed, and they spent the next couple of days finalizing the plan. Diego arranged for the dinner, meticulously setting every detail to evoke the intimacy they once shared. Candles, her favorite dishes, soft music, all meant to lure Maria into a sense of comfort, to lower her guard before he revealed what he knew. Friday came quickly, and as Diego prepared the dining room, he felt an eerie calm settle over him. Tonight, Maria would face the consequences of her actions. He set the table carefully, making sure everything was perfect. He even bought her favorite wine, pouring 2 glasses and setting them side by side, a silent reminder of the life they had shared and the betrayal she had wrought. When Maria walked in at 7 sharp, she seemed momentarily surprised by the setup. Her eyes flickered with a hint of nostalgia, but Diego could see the shadow of guilt hiding beneath her composed expression. She forced a smile, walking toward the table. "This is lovely, Diego," she said, her tone warm but wary. "It's been so long since we did something like this." He gestured for her to sit, his face a mask of calm. "Yes, I thought we deserved a special evening. To reconnect." They exchanged small talk over the appetizers, Maria carefully maintaining her pleasant facade. But Diego could see her discomfort growing as he subtly pressed her, asking questions that edged close to the truth. Her eyes darted nervously, and he could tell she was on high alert, though still unaware of just how much he knew. As they moved to the main course, Diego leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Maria, there's something I need to ask you." She froze, fork midway to her mouth. "Yes? Do you remember why we fell in love?" he asked, his tone soft but loaded with meaning. "Do you remember what made us trust each other, what made us vow to stay faithful?" Her face paled slightly, but she forced a small smile. "Of course, Diego. Those were special times." "Were they?" He tilted his head, watching her reaction closely. "Because sometimes I wonder if you still believe in those vows." Maria's smile faltered, and she set down her fork, her eyes narrowing slightly. "What are you trying to say, Diego?" In that moment, Diego saw her mask slip, just a crack, revealing the guilt she had been hiding. He leaned back, a satisfied smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "I think it's time you tell me everything, Maria, because I already know." She stared at him, her face paling further as realization dawned. The web of lies she had woven so carefully was unraveling before her eyes, and she was left speechless, caught in the trap he had so meticulously laid. The silence that settled between them was heavy, filled with the weight of unspoken truths finally coming to light. Maria's face had lost all its color, her eyes wide and panicked as she struggled to process Diego's words. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again, her gaze darting around the room as if looking for an escape. Diego leaned back in his chair, his gaze never leaving her. "Go on, Maria," he said quietly, his voice cold and unwavering. "I'm waiting." She swallowed, her hands trembling as she placed them in her lap, attempting to steady herself. "Diego, I don't know what you think you know, but—" "No more lies," he interrupted, his tone steely. "I've seen the messages. I've seen the photos. I know about Lucas." He let the name linger, watching her flinch as if it physically hurt her. Her composure cracked completely then, and she sank back into her chair, her face a mix of shock and shame. She looked down, unable to meet his gaze, and Diego felt a dark satisfaction at finally seeing her vulnerable, stripped of the arrogance and indifference she'd worn like armor. "Why?" he asked, his voice softer now but tinged with raw pain. "Why wasn't I enough for you?" Maria's shoulders slumped, and she covered her face with her hands, her voice muffled as she tried to answer. "I don't know, Diego. I felt lonely. You were always gone, and I thought maybe you didn't care anymore." Diego's jaw tightened, the bitterness in her excuse hitting him like another blow. "So you decided to throw everything away for what? A thrill? Validation?" She looked up, her eyes rimmed with unshed tears. "I know it sounds terrible, and maybe it was selfish, but I didn't think you'd find out. I never wanted to hurt you." A harsh laugh escaped him, void of any warmth. "You didn't think I'd find out? That's your excuse. Do you know how insulting that is, Maria?" He shook his head, the hurt and anger coiling tightly within him. "After everything we've been through, everything I sacrificed, you didn't think I deserved the truth." Tears finally spilled down her cheeks and she reached out, her hand trembling as it hovered over his. "Diego, please, I know I made a mistake, but I love you. I love us. I'll end things with him. I swear, it meant nothing." He stared at her hand, the same hand that had likely held Lucas with the same affection she now tried to offer him. He pulled his hand away, the gesture cold and final. "Love? You call this love? Don't insult me, Maria. You already made your choice." Her breath hitched, and she bit her lip, visibly breaking down. What do you want me to do?" she whispered, desperate. Diego looked at her, a sense of clarity washing over him. "I want you to leave. I want you to take whatever dignity you have left and walk out of my life. Because as far as I'm concerned, there's no going back from this." The finality of his words seemed to crush her, and she slumped, defeated. "But where will I go?" He looked at her, unsympathetic. "That's not my problem anymore. You made this bed, Maria. Now you get to lie in it alone." She rose shakily from the chair, looking around the room as if hoping it would somehow change his mind. But Diego's gaze was unwavering, and she realized that the man she had known, the man who had once loved her deeply, was gone. Gathering her things with trembling hands, she turned to him one last time, her voice breaking. I'm sorry, Diego?" He didn't respond, merely watching her with a detached, unreadable expression. She waited, hoping for some sign of forgiveness, some indication that things could be salvaged. But Diego remained silent, his face like stone. With nothing left to say, Maria walked toward the door, her steps heavy with regret. She opened it slowly, casting one last look over her shoulder, but Diego had already turned away. The door clicked shut behind her, and with it, the chapter of his life that he had once cherished. As the silence settled back into the room, Diego took a deep breath, a sense of liberation mixing with the ache in his heart. It hurt, yes, but it was also a release. The future stretched ahead of him, unknown and daunting, but free from the lies and betrayal that had tainted his past. And as he sat alone in the dimly lit room, Diego allowed himself a small, bitter smile. He had lost her, yes, but he had regained something far more valuable, his self-respect and his resolve to move forward, stronger than ever.